I'm going to walk you through a common knitting mishap that can happen as it pertains to having your stitches being held on scrap yarn. And in this demonstration, I'm going to be showing you a real life project because this actually recently happened to my mom, and she sent me her project so that I can fix it. And I figured this was a great opportunity to record it so that I could show you how you could fix this if it were to happen to you as well. So let me explain what happened here. This is my Sporty 45 cardigan. She's done a lovely job. This piece is worked from the bottom up. And when you get to the underarm area here, you're instructed to place stitches on either scrap yarn or stitch holder. She had opted to use scrap yarn. So as you can see, her back stitches are on scrap yarn right here. She had already worked her left front, and as you can see, everything looks nice here. She did a great job going up here, but she transferred her stitches from scrap yarn for her right front here. And notice after knitting a few rows, as you can see, she noticed something didn't look quite right. The stitches look a little bit elongated and a little bumpy. It looked more dramatic than just a potential gauge change issue. And so she sent me some pictures and I said, yep, that looks like something went awry. But then she also sent me a picture of the back, and that definitely told me what the issue was. So as you can see here, you see these elongated, almost like floats right behind the stitches. And so this is what really tipped me off to be able to know what the issue was. And the issue is that when she was transferring stitches from the scrap yarn onto the needle, she accidentally had transferred the stitch underneath the stitch being held on the scrap yarn. And this is a common issue that can come up when you're doing this process of transferring stitches from scrap yarn, because sometimes the stitch being held collapses. But because it's collapsed down, when you go to transfer the stitch onto the needle, it's hard to see. And sometimes you inadvertently transfer the stitch that's underneath it onto the needle instead. And that is what can cause this cause your fabric to look like this. I'm going to show you. So we can see it pretty clearly on the back, which still has the stitches on scrap yarn here. See how right now it looks like maybe the stitch being held on scrap yarn are these top loops right here, when in actuality, if I pull up, see how the actual stitch that's being held is actually this one right here. So when it's laying flat like this, it looks like maybe it's this one, but you got to pull up and that reveals the stitch. Let me show you now how you could first avoid this situation from happening in the first place. And then I'm going to go to that front where there was a bit of that mishap, and I'm going to show you how, if that were to happen to you, how you can go about fixing it to get the stitches looking normal again. I'm going to demonstrate how I transfer stitches from the back stitches here onto my needle. And I'm going to show you the technique that I would do when working with scrap yarn to ensure that I'm picking up the stitches correctly. So let's start on this end right here. And so here is my scrap yarn. And so what you want to make sure to do when you're transferring these stitches is you want to pull up on that scrap yarn, because as you can see, the issue is that the stitch being held, if I pull up, I can see, oh, okay, this is the stitch that's being held right here. But if I didn't pull up, I might think that the stitch being held is actually this one right here, right? Because it almost seems like that's the stitch that the scrap yarn is coming out of, but it's not. That's actually the stitch underneath the scrap yarn. So it's very important when you are transferring your stitches that you take the end of the scrap yarn and you pull up. And that way you can see that this is the stitch. And what I like to do is I take my needle tip and I first put it into the stitch, but then I give another tug on the yarn to make sure, okay, yep, I see that is definitely the stitch. And so then I would secure that, and then I would take the scrap yarn out. What I'm gonna do actually, so my mom had tied the end here. She uses like bread bag tags here to keep the ends together, which is a great idea, but I don't need that end right now. So let's go ahead and trim that. Okay, so then I'm going to take that end out just like that. And then I'm gonna do the same thing for the next stitch, because again, if you look, you might think here, oh, this is the strand that is the stitch being held, but it's not. That's actually the strand underneath. You got to pull up on that scrap yarn to reveal that this is the stitch being held. So then I will put that on. And as you can see, it feels a little tight on here. It usually is on the edges, and that's often where this issue occurs. So same thing, you don't want to go into this loop. That's where it looks like. You got to pull up on the scrap yarn, and then you see it's actually this stitch. And then I take the scrap yarn out. We'll do it to the next stitch again, pull up on it, and secure. So that's all you need to make sure to do is as you're transferring these is to make sure that when you're transferring, you're pulling up on the end, revealing the stitch. Because as you can see, this stitch has collapsed on itself just like that. And that's why it makes it seem like that loop over here is what's being held, but it's not. It is this one down here. And so you would just go one by one. Now, how else could you potentially avoid this from happening in the first place? And one is not using scrap yarn. You could use something like a stitch holder cord, which has become my preferred way of holding stitches because they are silicone cords that are very sturdy, but yet they're still flexible. And so they're a great way to hold stitches. And so far, I have not had this issue of collapsed stitches when using a stitch holder cord. And I'll put a link down below to a tutorial that I have all about how to use stitch holder cords. Another tip, if you want to use scrap yarn, is that often it can be helpful to use scrap yarn that is thicker than the yarn that you're actually working with. This is a sport weight, so if you were to use something more like a worsted weight, that might help to prevent the stitch from collapsing a bit. Now, let me show you how you could go about fixing the issue should this mishap have already happened to you and you're trying to figure out a way to go back and be able to fix it. Before we get started, I do want to bring up that it would be helpful to have a couple of tools handy. I have some locking stitch markers, which I'll show you in just a second why those are helpful. And I have this fix-it tool. Basically, all it is a short crochet hook. That's the most important part. You can use a regular crochet hook as well. I like this one because it's short. It also has a pointy end on this end should I need to kind of get into any stitches. So the method that I'm going to show you utilizing stitch markers and a little crochet hook, this is just one particular method that you can use when trying to fix this kind of situation. But just know that just like with most things in knitting, there's lots of different methods out there. But this is just one in particular that you could give a try should you find yourself in this particular situation. So what the stitch markers are for is that before we rip back, it'll be helpful to mark those floats that we have in the back. So these elongated stitches that we had, because basically what those are the missed stitches. So those were the stitches where instead of grabbing the stitch from the scrap yarn, inadvertently, my mom had taken the stitch underneath it. So these are just the missed stitches. And so it'll be helpful to mark those so that when we rip back to the row where we want to fix things, it might be a little bit easier. It's not required to do this. This is just one method that can be handy. So let's take a look. I know that this is a elongated miss stitch. You can kind of tell because obviously they're a lot longer than regular stitches, and they also kind of go over a stitch. So I'm going to mark this one. And then let's see, it looks like this is also one up here. And it looks like I have one down here. And you might have some that are on different, levels. That can happen when mishaps occur. And so I would just go like this and look for my elongated. This is a great example here, though. If you're not sure, this one is definitely an elongated one. And here, I'll take my little tool so I can be able to show you. See how it goes over the back of a stitch? Whereas if you're wondering, oh, is this one or is this just a looser stitch? You can kind of take the fabric and sort of go like this to spread it to see, no, this is a regular stitch. I can tell because it's not going over a stitch. It's just a little bit of a looser stitch. Whereas this, when I sort of spread it apart, I can see that it's going over stitches. And so that's definitely a miss stitch right here. So I'm going to continue in this manner until I've marked all of these elongated stitches along this back here. Okay, so I think I have found all of my missed stitches based on the elongated stitches. And so now what I want to do, so I want to rip back to about a couple of rows above where the stitches don't quite look right. So I'm just going to start ripping back. Okay, so I have ripped back to a couple of rows above where we have our missed stitches. And so what I want to be doing, I'm going to take the needle that I want my stitches to be on. You can also use a smaller needle if that's easier for you. So I want to start tinking. And tink is knit spelled backwards, and it's a term used for unknitting your stitches. I have a more comprehensive video about tinking that I can link to down below. The key here, it looks like the first stitch is already undone. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle into that one stitch. Now the next stitch I can see is still attached to the working yarn here. So to tink, I'm just going to go into the stitch that this stitch is coming out of. So just like that. And then I take the working yarn and I go like this to undo it. And this way I am securing the stitches on the needle on this particular row that I'm undoing stitch by stitch. So I'll go into here, undo, here. So I'm going to do this until I get to where I see my first marker. Okay, so I think, yep, we're at our next one. And as you can see, when I turn this over, there's two strands here. So this stitch has already dropped down. So first what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the locking marker off. Then I'm going to secure this stitch. And then if I go like this, I can see my two strands. I'm going to put my crochet hook through the first one, pull it through the stitch, and then do the same thing with the top one. Then put it onto the left needle. And so I'm just going to continue in this manner, tinking the stitches like this. Okay, so it looks like we've encountered our next one. I see my marker here, so I'm going to take that stitch here off. So first, I'm going to just take my marker off of the elongated stitch, put my stitch just like that. And again, I have my two elongateds because it had just become undone. And I'll go through the first one. Then I'll do the second. and then I will put that onto the left needle. And so as you can see, I'm just going stitch by stitch here, and sometimes checking as I'm going to make sure I didn't miss any of those elongated stitches. So it looks like I've encountered the next one. So we'll go ahead and just let that one drop out of there. And that way I can secure the stitch right here onto my crochet hook. And sometimes the yarn gets a little splitty. There we go. Okay. Oh, and I still have one of the floats attached. So let me take that off real quick. And so then I'm going to make sure I'm going into the first one. So that's why I kind of spread it out a little bit like this so that I can see it well. And so I'm going to grab that first strand, pull it through, and then grab the next one and pull it through. And then place it on here. So again, just continuing until I get to the next one, which looks like, yep, there I am again. So I would take that off, grab my stitch. This one, it looks like I only have one strand to go through. So let's do that. There we go. It looks like the next one became undone, but this one has two. So again, you're just going to take it one by one, put it in there, take the hook, just like in this manner, go through, and then the top one, and go through, and then put it onto my left needle. And it looks like the next one has already started to drop down again, so you don't have to be nervous. Now that we know how to fix these drop stitches, right? You just secure it onto the crochet hook, and I need to just go through the two strands that are right up above it. So I'm going to go into this one, bring it through, and then into this one, and bring it through. And then put this onto the left needle. And so then I will just keep going. And as we can see, it's already looking a lot better now on this side. But I'm going to continue in this manner until I get to the end. Okay, so I've just made it to the end of my row, and it already looks a lot better now. But what I like to do is I like to make sure to knit a row or two and then take another look, because sometimes you may have missed a couple of elongated stitches and it becomes more apparent after you've knit another row or two. So let me knit this row and then let's take one more look. All right, so I finished that row. Let's take a look, and it's looking a lot better. I'm not seeing anything dramatic like we had been seeing before. I hope this live demonstration here has helped you to understand this issue a little bit, both in how to potentially prevent it from happening, as well as if it's already happened to you, how you could go about fixing it.